Hey everyone, my name is Ricardo, Community Manager for the Visa Developer Platform, and we're super excited to be kicking off the Payments 101 webinar with some special guest speakers from Marqeta and Square. I'll let them introduce themselves when they get to their part, but really quick, some logistics for anyone who's really new to the webinar platform. We do have a question and answer widget right below the slides. So feel free to start sending in your questions. We'll have a Q&A at the very end with all of our speakers. We also have a resources link where we actually have a blog that Ahmed wrote on Payments 101. If you want to save that for later to read and learn some more. And if you want to join us for upcoming webinars, we have some coming up next week and in the upcoming months. There's a link to our webinar pages, and you can get more information on when those webinars are going to happen. All right, so enough of that. Agenda, payments and the art of possible with Navindu, who's Senior Director for the Visa Developer Platform. Anatomy of swipe, dip, and tap, Ahmed, who's VP of Product Management at Marqeta. And then 5 minutes to wow, Peri over at Square. So super excited to be kicking this off. If you joined us at the meetup in San Francisco, you were able to meet these guys in person, and we got a lot of great feedback from a lot of developers who they wanted to hear more of this. And a lot of you who aren't really in San Francisco, you know, they wanted to get this content. So we decided to bring it here in webinar format. So let's learn a little bit more about you. What do you see as the biggest blockers to enable payments in your respective business areas? Implementation effort, cost, user friction, or other? I'll give everyone a couple of minutes to answer that as I let these folks get ready for the next part.
Welcome, everyone. Given this is a webinar, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you attending worldwide. My name is Navindu Chandra, and I'm a Senior Director of Platform Strategy at Visa, and we are looking at options to be able to open Visa. Staying true to the spirit of Visa, we want to keep ourselves constantly on the edge of keeping Visa as an open network. And in that same spirit, we launched Visa Developer Platform a couple of years ago, which is a manifestation of one of the things that we are responsible as a part of our team. Extremely honored to be joined by Ahmed Siddiqui and Peri from Marqeta and Square today. We are going to be talking about how we see the payments ecosystem, and then Ahmed and Carl would be chiming in from their vantage points for as they see things from their perspective. So jumping on to the results of the poll, I was very curious on this one. We see that what you have in here is there was a pretty big participation, and 60% of you have been focused on, mentioned that implementation effort is what is one of the biggest blockers for you to be able to include payments in your respective commerce opportunities. And I think we couldn't have had better partners than Marqeta and Square to speak about it, as they are trying to bring down the barriers there. With that, what I would like to do is step back a little bit to give our view of how we as Visa are looking at the payments opportunity and the payments landscape, and how we are addressing the specific areas and the opportunities, and then hand it over to Ahmed, who will talk about instant issuance, digital issuance, and even just a payments 101 on things to consider as you build up your use cases. So speaking of opportunities, right? One thing we notice is that 3 secular trends that we are seeing in especially our area of payments, right? So when you look at point of sale payments, they continue to be a big opportunity for us at Visa. We still see a market opportunity of $17 trillion with payments being still made in cash and checks. And to give you a perspective on trend, this is actually considerably bigger than what it was 5 years ago. So what we are seeing is that just electronic and card payments, even at the point of sale, there is a big opportunity on the existing business that we have. The second shift that we are seeing is around the shift to e-commerce and m-commerce. As most of you are already in the know of m-commerce and e-commerce being growing leaps and bounds, one of the things, the big opportunity that we see is basically as we shift to digital, you really can't make payments with checks or cash. So the drive there is to be able to move to digital payments, and that plays favorably for electronic-based payments like card payments and other digital format as compared to the legacy paper, moving physical paper. As we kind of go into the third secular trend that we are seeing in this area is as technology matures, as the global landscape is flattening, what we are seeing is new use cases which open us up to a possibility of 30 trillion in payment volume, which weren't necessarily something we were looking at in the past as consumer-initiated payments. So these include payments around government payments to the citizens. It involves payments to a new one which kind of came up was the Lyft and Uber drivers. The sharing economy has enabled a lot of new use cases around being able to pay those 1099 workers in the US and basically doing that same thing globally. And we are also seeing a lot of traction and pickup in B2B as well as P2P payments, where even though they weren't traditionally in Visa's original business model, I think given the shift in technology and the demand, I think we are starting to at least pay attention to those areas. So given the previous slide had extremely large numbers, and a lot of you are wondering, okay, I see those numbers, what can I actually do about it, right? And I think one of the things that we want to kind of at least leave you with is food for thought on the ways we've seen successful payment companies deal with it in the past. I think irrespective of the market or the segment that you pick, one thing that's been true of payments historically in every single successful payments company is they've stuck to the basics. So the basics being you need to be fast, easy, secure, convenient. I think irrespective of what market you pick, what domain you pick, I think that's one of the key tenets of you would need to keep that in mind when you're building for payments. I think historically, if you look at payments and you go, what is payments? It's a transfer of value from a sender to a recipient. I think irrespective of how that gets delivered, be it digital, be it all of the new evolving form factors with the enablement of IoT devices or smartphones, all of those scenarios still meet those basic tenets. The one interesting development we've seen over the last few years is governments who were traditionally focused on protecting the consumers and the cardholders and the constituents of the payment ecosystem, they are actually massively pushing towards electronic payments and digital payments, which again, I feel is a big open new opportunity for all of the constituents in the payments ecosystem. So all of us love these charts which go up and to the right? And I think while we would all like to have an overnight success, I would like to probably step back a little bit and into the history of payments, and because I feel like I'm of the belief that the history is a precursor to, or at least as a prologue to what's coming in the future, and I think all of us are going to be using this information to be able to determine where we think payments is going. But I would like to go back to 1958, where basically that was the first time we launched the general purpose credit cards. This was what some of us call the first agile test in fintech was basically Bank of America made a mail drop of 60,000 credit cards to all of the consumers in Fresno. And they had all of the businesses in that small city lined up. And it did launch as an experiment, which over a period of time took off. And in a couple of years, I think they had a few million cardholders from the 60,000, from the humble beginnings of the 60,000 that they started. And so in 1966, fast forward a few years, Bank of America took a strategic decision to actually open up the network. So instead of, at that point, there were lots of different domestic, like regional networks, and it was basically whoever could get to the customers or merchants faster was how they were approaching it. But in 1966, Bank of America took a strategic decision to open up the network and license it, which let the banks basically bring in their cardholders and the merchants into the network. And that was, I think, one of the things that we at Visa believe for payments to be an open network which levels a playing field for all of the stakeholders in there. And so that was in 1966. Fast forward a few more years, and so we are approaching the 50-year anniversary for its credit cards later in September of this year. But fast forward a few years, in 1973, Visa was able to see the advances in the digital computers, and what we saw was we moved from paper-based processing to what was then called Base 1 for the authorization settlement systems back in 1973. I'm going to skip a few decades here so that you don't have to go through the whole rundown, but I think the few significant other moments that we saw in the VisaNet history was basically in the 90s with the invention of the internet. What we saw was instead of moving from a 9 to 5, 5 days a week, 6 days a week at physical point of sale, we started seeing huge growth in what we call the card not present transactions, which was 24/7 and happening anywhere from the world to anywhere in the world. And that was something that we kind of had to, again, adjust the network to help build in all of those capabilities. The two other significant data points I would probably lay out is, like, in 2007, with the advent of the iPhone, you had the m-commerce pickup. And what we believe and hope when we look at this in hindsight a few decades from now is in 2016, we launched Visa Developer Platform, and we hope that it will be covered as one of the landmarks in retrospect a few years from now. But the reason I kind of bring this is the thing that you need to look at is, if you look at 60,000 cards to 3 billion cards today, it was not an overnight success. But the one beauty of payments is that once you have a network where you have consumers and merchants enabled on either side and you're solving a real business problem, then it just picks up on its own, where it is a positive reinforcement cycle where more consumers means more merchants and vice versa. And so with that, what we are trying to do is position ourselves or be prepared as the digital ecosystem evolves to be able to help the new constituents or the new participants, such as our wonderful partners here, Marqeta and Square, be able to help us grow the payments ecosystem. If there was one thing I would leave you with this, one point I would leave this slide with, it is think big and start small. I think that's one thing that I would probably emphasize on this particular point here. On the same theme, I think, again, today Visa operates in more than 200 geographic regions. And one thing we've noticed, even though the basics of the security, trust, performance, convenience, safety remain the same, we do need to, and this is where we are a network, but everyone on the periphery can help participate and grow, is the local trends are very different for each individual region. What we see in America is very different from Europe versus Australia. Some of you might be able to decipher this picture, but this is trying to show that tap and pay, which is very popular in Australia and UK and Canada, is a very different way of paying than what would probably be happening in Africa or Asia. So I think what we are, and that usually is the area where you can see a lot of, while the core money movement isn't really changing, how it is that you actually take it to market, deploy it in market, opens up an opportunity for a lot of developers world over. The other part is when you actually do launch these products, one of the things is actually looking at the social norms and the consumer behaviors and the things like, do they actually believe in credit? Do they believe in, is most of their spending debit? Is it cash based? Taking into consideration those things would actually help you structure a payments system that is built for those specific markets. Okay, the AP. So for those of you old enough, you may have seen the Steve Ballmer interview about developers from the year 2000. I think if there was going to be a remake of that video this year, it's going to be APIs built by developers. And I think we are of the firm belief that APIs is a way for any two organizations to be able to tap into each other's capabilities and work together quicker and faster, and without the onerous integration of an end-to-end product stack. The world is getting to a stage where you are offering, it just helps with bite-sized, consuming and publishing bite-sized capabilities for other stakeholders or constituents to consume. With that belief, and to continue with the theme of the 1966 transition from where we moved to an open network, we are of the firm belief that Visa Developer Platform is helping enable that transition for the new constituents and the new players. And we have launched Visa Developer Platform about 2 years ago. At this point, since launch, we have had more than 10,000% growth in our API traffic. We have more than 100 APIs across 40 different products on the platform today, and we expect and hope that you would build with us. Thank you. And with that, I would pass it over to Ahmed.
Thank you. Well, as you were kind of talking, I was thinking about something. I actually just came back from vacation from Florida, where I was in Disney World. And fundamentally, like, the way in which you pay at Disney World is so different. And I think that, like, you're basically using a wristband to tap and pay for everything. And my daughter, who's like 4 years old, she's literally paying like that, right? And so I was just kind of like thinking about that. And I mean, the world of payments really is changing a lot. But at the end of the day, like, I think there's a lot of innovation that is going to happen. So anyways, with that being said, hi, my name is Ahmed. I work for Marqeta as a product manager. We are based actually out of Oakland, California, right across the bay from you guys. And I'm super stoked to be here. This kind of talk came about as Ricardo and I were just grabbing lunch and kind of talking about how, it's actually, the ecosystem is pretty complicated, but if you really distill it down, it's actually not that difficult. And unfortunately, like, if you read up online, there's not a ton of documentation about, just like actually how all this stuff works. Like, when I tap my wristband, like, what's actually happening? So that's really what I wanted to actually run through with you guys today. So again, Marqeta, this is our practical guide. And really what we're going to be talking about is the ecosystem, what happens during swipe, tap, and a dip, how does money actually move, what are the motivations for actually creating this ecosystem, and then what are some opportunities in issuing for developers. So again, Marqeta is a developer platform built by developers specifically for issuing cards. And again, when we talk about cards, again, they could be virtual, they could be digital, they could be tokenized, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But for this talk specifically, I want to talk through the ecosystem. So again, payments always starts with people. It's people that want to buy things from people that want to sell things, right? And if you look at this slide here, there's the acquirer, which think about it as kind of the terminal. So where you're actually going to be performing a swipe. You have the person who has a card, and the card is typically issued by an issuer processor or issuing bank, et cetera. And then you've got the rails that's in between, which is essentially powered by Visa, MasterCard, and Discover. And So what happens here is that money moves from essentially one bank to the other, and this messaging system enables that. So again, on the acquiring side, you've got people that are actually distributing out terminals or virtual terminals. They're also considered as gateways as well. And then on the issuing side, there's typically a bank that's associated with it. So if you look on the back of one of your credit cards, it'll say like issued by Citi or issued by Bank of America, et cetera. So that's actually the bank that's issuing the card to you, which you were actually talking about. And essentially, Marqeta is an example of an issuer processor. So we actually will process the transaction. So this is kind of the high-level view of what the ecosystem looks like, but I wanted to kind of break it down and talk a little bit about each component. So what actually is happening during a swipe or a dip or a tap now? It used to be swipe, but now with the advent of chip cards, it's more a dip or a tap with tokenized cards. So I can get my slides to work. So with a swipe, dip, or a tap, what is actually happening? So we've got our friend here, Jerry, who has the card on the left-hand side, and he wants to go to a shop and he wants to buy something. And so what he's doing is he's going to perform that swipe, dip, or a tap at the merchant location. And there's going to be this process where you're going to authorize. So you'll see it. Usually when you go and buy something, you'll see this thing authorizing. So what's actually happening during that time frame? So essentially, there's like less than 3 seconds where a decision needs to be made on if you're allowed to spend at this place or not. So basically, the acquirer is asking, hey, Visa, I have Jerry here, and he wants to buy something here for $40. Does he have $40? And then the message goes to Visa, and then Visa says, all right, cool. Actually, what Visa is doing here is that there's a message called the ISO 8583 message, and that is basically telling Visa that this is this person, it's this range of credit cards. And then what Visa does, it says, all right, cool, it's a Visa card. And oh, by the way, now that I know what this card number is, I know which issuer to actually go to. So then Visa passes this message over to the issuer processor. And then the issuer processor is the one that's actually making the decision here. So here it's saying, yep, he's got money on the card, but I don't want him to spend at this location. And so there are rules and things that can be defined at the issuer processor level that can prevent certain things. And those things are actually what's tied into sort of the terms of service that you have with the card. And then, so the message then goes back to Visa. So it says, Visa basically saying, issuer says he's good for the money, but he's not allowed to spend. And then finally, we get the decline message, the dreaded decline message. So it says, sorry, you've been declined. And a lot of times it doesn't actually tell you why, but sometimes it does. But really, it was actually in Jerry's terms of service that said that, yeah, I mean, he's got the money, but the thing is that we actually don't want him to be buying from liquor store. And so the question is, like, what do we actually know? So actually, there's a lot of data that we know at the time of the swipe. So we know who this person is, we know their card number, we know the date and the time that the swipe happened, we know the amount, we know the merchant type, the location, and there's like this huge range of data that's actually being sent over via this ISO 8583 message. And essentially the acquirer and the issuer, really what they're doing is they're kind of like parsing it and then sending it and parsing it back. And so there's actually some pretty interesting opportunities here because you have so much data to work with. So that's really what actually happens during the time of swipe. So again, you have less than 3 seconds to actually make a decision in this. And so if you can imagine millions and billions of transactions running at the same time, I mean, it's a pretty robust system that sort of the networks have built out. It's some pretty amazing rails if you think about it from a developer perspective to be riding on. So when we're talking about how does the money actually move, so the authorization step is happening in real time, but typically the money moves a day later. So what's actually happening is that the acquirer or the merchant, let's just say that this liquor store, right? They will actually move money by sending a command at the end of their day of like, what are all their transactions over to Visa? And then Visa will pass those details over to the issuing bank. And then the money will essentially move from the issuing bank to the merchant bank. So again, money goes into the truck moves over, and then money goes to the merchant bank. I mean, that's really essentially what's happening. And this process is actually what's called settlement. And again, it's happening on a daily basis. Again, the weekend it's not daily, but for the most part, I mean, it is a super duper consistent way of moving money. You know for a fact that a swipe has happened today. I know that I'm going to have it in my bank the next day, which is pretty great for merchant. So why? Like, so what's the big deal, right? So the thing is that we have Jerry here who has a card, but there's just more and more people that have cards that want to be able to buy, and merchants want to be able to accept cards, because if they don't accept cards, then, well, they're losing out on this big market. I mean, I don't remember buying anything for cash for like the longest time, you know. Yeah, this is actually why, you know, these acquirers, they want, or the merchants, I'm sorry, want to be able to accept payment. And in order to accept that payment, they're actually willing to give a portion of the proceeds over to essentially all of the people in this party to make this transaction happen, which is really, you know, how money is actually made. And especially if you're thinking about it from a developer perspective, there's actually a lot of opportunities sort of even both on the acquirer side and on the issuer side to like come up with a pretty interesting business model. So let's kind of talk about that, right? So money is the pile of money that was made at the merchant is sitting at their merchant bank, right? And so what happens is that a percentage of that, you know, a little bit goes to the acquirer, a little bit goes to the network, and then, sorry, let me do that animation again. It's fast. A little bit goes to the network, and then a little bit goes to the issuer processor. And so again, there's a lot of sort of rate tables and stuff that you need to think through. I won't go through that, but at the end of the day, this is actually how this entire ecosystem works. It's why it exists. That's where people are making the money. And I think there's just a lot of opportunities for developers to do some pretty cool things, and that's what Carl and I are really interested in talking with you about. So again, opportunities in issuing and processing. So again, we power some pretty cool experiences. We partner quite a bit actually with Square on some products. But again, the idea is we can issue physical cards, which I think most of us are used to. We can issue virtual cards, and we can issue tokenized cards. And when I say tokenized cards, these are the cards that will go into Apple Pay, to GPay, to Samsung Pay, et cetera. And so that experience, again, like we were talking about earlier, like, yeah, we could power a card that actually sits inside of a wristband, but you don't think of it as a physical plastic. So again, the mechanism for which money is being transmitted is going to change. But at the end of the day, it's all still running through the same rails. So again, like I mentioned earlier, we know a ton of data about this particular transaction. And over at Marqeta, we actually will parse all this data and put it into a really nice JSON for developers to look at, to put into their processing systems to do stuff with it. And I wanted to talk through a few examples. And I love donuts, and so I want to talk about a donut shop. So Jerry here actually owns a donut shop. And he's growing his business a lot. He buys a ton of sprinkles and sugar and all sorts of awesome stuff for his donuts. World renowned. They're kind of like the hipster donuts, you know. So, anyways, so what he is doing is that he's got he has a bunch of people working for him, and he doesn't want to have to keep going out and buying his special sugar or sprinkles or whatever. So he gives these sort of expense cards out to his drivers. And the thing is, he wants to like control it pretty carefully, meaning that he only wants them to go to his special, organic grocery stores to buy his sugar and sprinkles. He doesn't want them to go out and spend it anywhere else. So what he can do is at the issuer level, he can actually say, well, I only want him to spend at these certain locations or these types of locations, et cetera, and even apply some sort of spend limit. So you could say, at a time, I only want them to be able to spend $100, nothing more than that. So what it does is it protects him as a business owner, and it allows him to have his own sort of like branded donut card. As well, you can see the little donut logo. Mm-hmm. His son is a little bit different. So his son, Barry, loves eating donuts, but he likes a variety of donuts. He doesn't really like making donuts. And he actually came up with this idea to build an app where he lists out a bunch of donut shops. They're all ranked and got the reviews and everything. What you can do is you can actually place an order at that donut shop and he'll deliver it to you. And so he did this for himself because he really loved donuts, but then he realized this actually could be a really great business. And so he hires a bunch of these 1099 contractors, as we were talking about with the sharing economy, right? And he gives them all donut delivery cards. But the thing is, he's like, I don't want these drivers to go out to the donut shop, pick up a donut for somebody, and then buy a coffee on top of it. So he's actually able to very finitely define what people are spending on. So what's happening is that as these drivers are going out and picking up on behalf of other people that want donuts, we can actually give out cards that have $0 on there. And we have a technology called just-in-time funding where when that swipe happens, when we're talking about the authorization, actually the data that's being collected is actually being sent to Peri. And Peri is actually making a decision. So for example, like the date and time, the amount, the actual location, like we can take all that data, give it to Peri. Peri can make a decision and then tell us in real time if he wants to approve it or decline it. And so when he approves it, it actually loads the money and then it takes it right off. So actually these drivers have a card with them that has $0 on it always. And so there's actually no fraud happening because we're actually able to finitely control it. And if you can imagine, 3 seconds, all this is happening. It's pretty awesome. And so this is kind of like, I gave you just some 2 basic examples of things that developers can do with their creativity, kind of by leveraging at least the Marqeta platform. But just in general, there's a lot that can be done here in payments. And I'm just like super excited to be sitting between these 2 that can talk about sort of all the great innovation. So with that being said, like, I want to hand it over to Carl to talk a little bit about, and I guess we've got our sort of website, our Twitter handle, devsupport@marqeta.com, and then marqeta.com API, and I will hand it over to Carl.
Thanks, Ahmed. My name is Carl Peri. I'm the lead for Square's developer platform efforts. Really excited to be here today. And actually, I'm really excited to be here today to talk about what I call, and actually one of my old bosses is the one who came up with this term, and I stole it from him. It's just 5 minutes to wow. And I think, the comment earlier about what do you think about most, and implementation effort was the #1 thing. I think it's directly to what we as platform builders need to be focused on, which is really building platforms that are both scalable, clear, understandable, and optimized for developer consumption, not optimized for how internal teams think about what APIs to expose and what systems we're trying to build for our own internal processes and business needs. We really need to focus on the external developer that's going to be consuming those APIs. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Rube Goldberg. I love Rube Goldberg. Me and my kids watch stuff on YouTube all the time. But this is actually a self-wiping napkin. You can find it on Wikipedia under Rube Goldberg's entry. It's fascinating because actually, if you think about the way solutions get built in commerce, and in particular with payments, this is actually what happens a lot, to be fair. There's like 20 different systems that are involved. I have to build a special thing for every integration between every system, to go from A to B to C to D. These things need to be connected. They're probably not documented very well. It's really difficult for developers, and as you voted earlier, implementation effort is the #1 concern for you. And as a developer, oftentimes I have to deal with this mess when I come in to customers' particular business, or if I'm building a platform myself on top of other solutions. And don't take my word for it. Actually, let's look at a small seller's front of office desk where they're taking orders and handling everything. And this is actually a seller in Japan. There's like 10 different things here that they need to use to actually meet their customers' needs. There's a register, obviously. You can see over here, there's a computer, which probably has customer information, maybe some inventory information. Additionally, there's a sidecar here, a little payment terminal that you can't see. They've got a loyalty card in here somewhere. I don't know where it is exactly. They've got their business cards. Now think about trying to build a solution to make this seller's life easier. And imagine that 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, a million times over. That's actually the state of commerce today. And as every person here has talked about, it's not getting any easier. It's actually getting more complex as we introduce new channels. You used to only have to worry about a website and coming in store. Now you have to worry about Apple Watch. You have to worry about IoT devices. I have to worry about my cell phone. I have to worry about voice-enabled commerce. Like, it just keeps expanding. And unless we focus on taking these incredibly amazing concepts, innovations that are coming out and making them understandable, usable, clearly easy to build applications around, developers are going to continue to bang their head against the wall while trying to solve this solution instead of us making it easier for them. I think our job as platforms actually is really simple. We make it easy for developers to build solutions. We take care of the undifferentiated lifting so that you don't have to as a developer when you're building these solutions. And I think if we focus on that, we can actually make things really easy, and developers will flock to our platforms. Because honestly, developers, when they come in, if they can't understand what you can do for them in the first 5 minutes, if they can't understand how they might build something, and maybe even there's a little sample that it begins to approximate a critical part of whatever their solution is, they're going to go somewhere else because there's many, many choices to what they can go do. And I think as I've, for the last, I'm getting older and older. I've worked in the space in kind of platforms for about 20 years. There are 6 key themes that I think are important as I've thought about building platforms. And at Square, we think about things and how to really enable any developer to take advantage of what we're building. And those 6 core themes are pretty simple, pretty obvious: simplicity, innovation, stability, availability, cost, and then commerce. And we'll go through each one of these in detail as we go through the presentation. At its core, being simple is both extremely difficult, but is a huge lever. I think of sand or Lego blocks as a great encapsulation of this metaphor, which is you can take the sand, and there's billions and billions and billions and trillions of these pieces of sand, grains of sand all over the world. But people can take these things and they can form whatever they want to in shapes that are like utterly astounding and amazing. If you just go look online for sand sculptures, or you just try to go look at massive Lego builds that people have, I think Minecraft is the new version of this, basically, where you can build anything you want, and your imagination is only constrained by what you can think of. But the key thing here is that you've built the smallest building blocks that connect together, and you've done it in an intentional way. You haven't randomly thrown everything that's currently implemented in your services internally and made it available to every developer. I think that's the fastest way for failure for any platform, is to just suddenly expose your APIs using your own technology or using a third-party technology, just get developers to use it. The most important thing here, to try to understand what the small pieces you're going to build, what the large pieces you're going to build, and how they connect together, is to go talk to developers. It's really simple. It's the number one thing to go do. So building the smallest pieces possible and building them intentionally to connect together, that's how I think you start to optimize for the developer experience. And those Lego blocks or those grains of sand are the things that developers want, not the things that you necessarily think that they want. If you're not familiar with this is actually the first public microprocessor Intel did back in the 70s. It's 4004. This is the beginning of where we are today. I pointed to my Apple Watch earlier. This thing is actually what enabled us to build this. Obviously, things have changed and microprocessors are significantly smaller. But if you go back to the first point of simplicity, the beginning building blocks, which is this microprocessor, has really enabled us to build all these incredible things on top of it. And we take each one of these innovations and connect them together because they've been built and designed intentionally to be connected together. And developers can go build things you've never thought of. This is the thing that is amazing to me about developers. They are crazy, insane, brilliant, amazing people that will build things that nobody has ever thought of. And in fact, many people think are crazy, but many of the innovations and the things that we use in our normal lives today and that we will discover in the future are built by these amazingly brilliant, crazy people, because they have a concept and they take these pieces that are built for them and they combine them in ways you never would have thought possible. And that's really what a developer platform unlocks. One of the things that excites me about what we're doing at Square is we're enabling any developer to go and build solutions for any seller in the world or themselves. And I think that it's fascinating to look at what developers think they want to do with the pieces that you have today, and then the things they say that they need in order to move forward in a really untraditional, innovative way. So I think this is critical. Take the small pieces you've built, make them public to everybody, and really think about how they connect, because then people will take those and start to build more amazing things on top of it. Stability is kind of one of these things that's, I think, increasingly become well known and understood as cloud computing has come about. I worked in Amazon. I worked on S3. I was the engineering manager for all the public APIs. And anytime we had a little blip in S3, like the internet went down. I remember being on calls when we had issues, and our customers trust us to have the most stable platform in the world. It's commonplace to have 4 nines availability, and the reality of the situation is there are going to be times where you're not going to meet it, but you need to be striving for even better, 5 nines, whatever that is. And as you build out your platform, a core part of your design process is whether it's the architecture of the system, the implementation of the system, or I think just as important, the operational aspects of how you go and manage and monitor the system that's running. This has to be built in and designed from the ground up as part of any platform you build. People love you as much as you are stable and are as transparent with them. So, the reality situation is I'd love to build a 100% uptime system. The reality is that's likely unable to happen. We continue to strive towards that, but the important thing is that when there are problems and when you do have issues, that you're completely transparent and open with your customers, and you give them clear timelines around when you expect this to be resolved. You publish postmortems, you make improvements to your system with every one of those learnings that you take out of these events, and your system becomes more stable, more available, more reliable for every single developer building on top of that platform. And it's these learnings that we take from every one of these instances that make not only the platform more reliable and available, but what's most important is that your customers come to trust you more because you are actually making their lives better. And that needs to be a focus for every single platform company in the world. And honestly, it's one of these invisible things that people don't necessarily think about all the time, but is critical to success long term. I talked about availability and stability together. I apologize for that. But these 2 things are incredibly important, and really focusing on this and making it part of how you run your systems and your services is critical. And finally, I think cost in the payments industry, you just went through how people make money and where money flows. I think actually decreasing the cost of every single person in the value chain is incredibly important. The more money that either sellers can get put back into their bank account, or the lower the cost is to actually run your solution on top of that system is critical. One of my managers has always said cost is actually a feature. It is a feature that you can use quite amazingly well. And AWS has done this. Every year you see at their conference, they trumpet how many times in the year they reduce prices. And you see their competitors in this space, whether it's Azure or Google Cloud and others that follow similar suit, right? Price is a tool and feature that every one of these companies use to their advantage. And it is something that developers really love, or at least when I was in AWS, developers would love when we reduced the price of networking or storage, and they would continue to double down on using S3 as a particular solution for their applications. And I think it's the same thing in the payments and commerce space. And then finally, I think at Square, we think about this as commerce being a much broader area. I like to use the analogy of an oyster and a pearl. I think of payments as that grain of sand we talked about in the beginning, and it ends up inside of the oyster. But without all of the other pieces that surround it, the chemical processes, the actual, the way that the oyster is, you wouldn't end up getting this amazing thing that is the pearl. And that is what we're focused on, is not just building out the payment capabilities, charging a card, storing a card, performing a transaction, but things like offers, buy one, get one free, happy hour prices, coupons, we could have loyalty, things like order management across many channels. This is increasingly table stakes requirements as you build platforms that every single seller or developer need to build solutions to meet their buyers wherever they're going to be, whether it's in a mobile application, whether it's on their website, or whether it's through these IoT devices that were discussed earlier. And really focusing on the broader context of commerce is critical, as at least we at Square are evolving our platform. So I think from there, we're going to take Q&A.
Yeah, we've got some questions coming in. If you want to send some questions, there's a Q&A widget at the very bottom of your screen, so go ahead and send some in. All right, let's start with the first one. Will the difference in local behavior and markets lead to more fragmentation in terms of fintech development, or will the best tech emerge as a global constant regardless of local trends? Thoughts?
So since I kind of initiated that, I'll probably start with the response and then head to Ahmed and Carl to chime in as well. I look at it as, instead of there being like one single dominant player, ruling the whole world, right? Like, as much as every company would want to do that, I don't think that's going to be the future. And so I think that's what adds to the opportunities and the excitement and the diversity of the use cases in payments. So if I was to bet there wasn't going to be a single payment company or single way of doing payments, this is going to be, it's going to be distributed. I think, again, if you go back to the basics, what is payments? It's transfer of value from sender to recipient. That construct doesn't change, but doing it in creative and innovative ways to adapt to the local norms and the regional expectations is something that would continue to happen.
Yeah, no, awesome. I think there is going to be a little bit more complexity, but the thing is, without that, without people being creative and trying different things, like where's the innovation going to come, right? So it's going to happen. I think it's great.
Yeah, I think that it's so large. I don't think that there's going to be any one dominant player. I don't buy it. Yeah. I do think that there will be likely leaders in different geographies and or spaces. So I do expect that. I think that many companies want to be global and will continue to focus on global reach. But at least as far as I can see, there's not anything right now where there's a leader in a space that would dominate all payments or all commerce. It's just not a reality. There are obviously other technologies out there where that could potentially start to form single winners, maybe two winners, but I think we're far off from that. So,
is Marqeta platform available only for US? What other regions support?
Yeah, we're predominant in the US. We've got Canada. We're looking at a number of different regions as well.
What are key differences between networks like Visa and MasterCard? Any key differences in the networks, or are they all run the same?
I think if you kind of go to, again, the theme to the original question of like, is there a single payment scheme or a network which is going to rule the world, right? Probably not, right? Historically, if you look at the growth of MasterCard versus Visa, Visa started off from the North American region. MasterCard has its origins in the European region. In terms of capabilities and the network, I believe while we offer very similar capabilities, I think we let the clients decide on who they go to for based on our network performance, the features, and everything else, and we kind of let the market decide for that.
What core banking is Marqeta integrated?
What core banking is?
I'm not sure if that.
I don't understand that question.
Yeah, can resend that question, Ernesto. Can you determine the line items on an invoice at authorization time so that the developer can make better decisions?
Oh, that's a great question. So at sort of on our side, on the issuer side, it's actually quite difficult to do. There are ways to do it, but again, the merchant needs to agree to give that information, and then you can figure out how to extract it. I think you guys actually know more on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as long as it's provided in the request for auth, there's lots of information that you can use to leverage whether you should take this or not. So that information is available. The requirement there obviously is that everybody from where the purchase is occurring through whatever devices that is over the network to the issuer, that's actually sent. There are incentives for doing that in some cases. So there's ways to kind of get, the device vendors, the merchant, and others to send it, but it requires everybody to send that information.
Is Square available outside the US? What regions does it cover so far?
Yeah, I mean, Square is absolutely available outside the US. We're available in United States, Canada, Japan, Australia, and the UK right now. And our platform is available in all of those regions as well. So.
How, as a developer, can I provide a user an option to create the virtual card with the custom amount and limited expiration period of the virtual card?
Well, that's on the issuer side. So again, as a developer, you could go in and preset those rules in the beginning, or what you can do is you can actually make the decision at time of swipe as well. So every major card has to have some sort of restriction set on it, and that restriction is typically dictated by the bank, the issuing bank that you're working with. But then again, you can actually apply additional restrictions on top of that.
So like, I didn't ask this last time we met. So how is that done? So a developer, let's say I want to provide other restrictions, similar to the donut shop example you did. So does a developer write a service that integrates with Marqeta, and then you call their service? Is that how it works?
That's exactly how it works.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, you can write a service that basically sets those cards with certain limits upfront.
Okay.
Or otherwise, you essentially set up like a gateway.
Okay.
Where essentially at time of swipe, we would call your gateway.
Okay.
Get the response from there, and then bring back.
Okay.
So yeah, you can do it kind of both ways.
Where do you see alternative payment methods affecting the value chain of the four-party model?
Alternative payment methods. Alternative payment methods?
Alternative payment methods.
We should ask, are they talking about Bitcoin, Ethereum, things like that, or is it something else? So if we can get that information, I think we probably have an opinion on that.
Yeah, and I think in general, just given where cash and check is and the market itself is growing, right? We see that as there's a lot of room to fill than having to change existing payment habits or methods, which will happen over a period of time, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it needs to have, that's something that's going to evolve. But getting a clarification would help answer.
Yeah, I mean, on that, I think it really, you have to do one of two things. Either buyers need to change their habits by themselves, or there needs to be incentives for buyers to change those habits. For sellers, the value is I want more sales, right? We talked about this earlier. And so if there's either technology or cultural shift that buyers really adopt and want to, that can actually drive these alternative payment methods, or if you incent them in some way, right?
How can developers build for government payments? How do they navigate the legal landmines around government payments and innovating there?
So I think that is where the value of an entrepreneur comes in, right? When you are creating something, you have to be creating something of value for other people to realize it and for everyone to benefit, right? So I think that's part of the responsibilities, I would say, of the developer to spot that opportunity that they're going after and then figure out what the local landscape and the regulatory rules around it are. And of course, you would, like, if you look at examples of PayPal, of Square, of Uber, right, they kind of emerge through these regulatory hurdles, right? Like Uber, San Francisco, the birthplace of Uber, had them, I was recently reading, had them blocked out because they had Uber Cab in their name, and then they got rid of the name. They dropped the cab from the Uber Cab, and then somehow the regulators were fine with it, right? But I think that's where the creativity and the persistence of the entrepreneurs come in to spot those opportunities and go after them.
Technical usage of an API may be simple, but the contractual business relationship needed to use the API may not be. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so I mean, I totally agree with the comment. I've gone and looked at other platforms in both the payment space and elsewhere. Some of them, I've applied to lots of them. Obviously, I worked at Square. They don't even respond to me in some cases. In some cases, there's a fee, like tens of thousands of dollars to get access to that. You have to be part of groups sometimes. I think this is kind of historically how, in many spaces, and financial services is one of them, where developers have been locked out because there's not an open platform. And this is something I'm personally passionate about, where I want to build a platform that any developer, wherever we are, can participate in. To use Square's developer platform, you just need to do our sign up, and it's the same sign up that a seller would do. And obviously, we have 2 million plus sellers that are using our platform and our ecosystem today. So I think absolutely there are blockers, and it's something that I think that is an area where platforms and companies can actually innovate by enabling anybody to use those platforms. So absolutely think it's something that needs to be focused on.
What value does an acquirer provide to a merchant? Can a merchant send a payment request directly to Visa for settlement?
Short answer is no, because the message is actually kind of complicated. So you need something on the end of the merchant to be able to process that message and send it. You need a bank behind it too that can actually accept the payment.
How do you see the credit card rewards offers market since the interchange rates are under pressure worldwide by regulators?
Can you repeat that question?
How do you see the credit card rewards offers market since the interchange rates are under pressure worldwide by regulators?
So rewards, actually, what I've found is it has a combination effect. Things that are, if it's like, let's say, for example, Best Buy branded credit card, like, I mean, they have offers and loyalty points and stuff that clearly they're quite a bit more than what interchange rates are. And so it's actually why you have these kind of co-brand relationships where they're actually able to incentivize and do things that are completely separate from sort of this interchange that we were talking about.
How do we get more of our suppliers to move to accepting more digital payments? Any tips?
I think it's really hard because, if you think about cash and checks, there's a perception that it's free for use. And I don't remember any of the studies or numbers, but there's actually a lot of data out there that indicates that the cost of using those things actually takes time, energy, effort, and actually reduces the value of that. I also think that there's a level of seamlessness and simplicity that's offered through these other payment capabilities. And those two together is how I would kind of talk to whoever my suppliers are and really walk them through like why it's easier for them, why it's simpler for them. And if you're giving them cash, for example, why actually that might cost them more than they actually understand or perceive.
Especially if they're virtual, if they're an online shop, where you're gonna mail a check to Amazon.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to basically see as I would say, like, you would see even in enterprises, right? It started off with consumer expectations around what a smartphone was, to then the expectation moving over to that as employees, and then as basically even the accounting teams, everywhere the expectations and the bad are honing towards like make it easy, make it simple, make it traceable, right? You would start to see that shift, and I think that's where all of us collectively are working towards that market opportunity.
In the small business space, what sort of integrations do you feel need to be built to convert them from being paid by check or cash?
Like just in general with the small business space, I honestly think that's a really tough answer. I don't have an explicit answer for it. I think that, at least when we think about how we make sellers' lives easier at Square, we think about the integration across our first-party products and how seamless and how much simpler it is to run your business, as well as the kind of plethora of third-party integrations that really make a seller's life significantly easier. There are areas we're never going to go into, we're not thinking about going into. Great example is a partner like Intuit or QuickBooks. Like that solution makes every small business life easier. Understanding what those big unlocks are, either on a vertical basis, like for restaurants or retail or an appointments-based, services-based seller, versus things that kind of are accrue value across all. I think that's what you go and look at. I would think about focusing first on vertical and seeing how we can help those specific verticals. Because Square, historically has really focused on the horizontal, and we continue to do that. But we increasingly also have some vertical investments, and we look to how to make that easier first party and third party together.
Okay, we'll take two more questions. Who owns the data about customer card that the customer card swipes, the things he or she buys, time when it was bought, the amount? Is it the issuer or the acquirer?
So it's actually the issuing bank that owns that data.
And I guess we'll take this as the last one. Where do you see tokenization in 5 years?
So again, kind of as I was talking, like these IoT devices, I think are going to be it's going to be everywhere. One thing that I was thinking about was robots paying robots. Like, they're going to use tokenized essentially cards to do that. That's a really secure way of actually transacting.
Yeah, I think it's going to become one of the most, if not the most prevalent way that things are actually paid for is via tokenization, whether it's cards on file or there's a token on my watch or my phone or whatever, and I go use it. And like the the number of channels that expand require tokenization to be successful, and that will not stop in the near term.
Yeah. And that is something that Visa is very heavily investing in. For us to be prepared for tokenization, I think it'll be the human spirit and innovation, as Carl was saying, right? That's what is probably limiting us in terms of the use cases and the possibilities that are going to happen. But I think all of us as payment enablers are preparing for that future.
All right. Thank you. For those that didn't get your question answered, we will try to get to you within today. We'll be sending a link to the webinar recording. Thank you, Marqeta and Square and Navindu, for taking time. All right, everyone, have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot.